Hello everybody and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be checking out Space Marine Creation / Recruitment, your guide to becoming an Astartes, Warhammer 40k lore by Luetin09. Yes guys, this was recommended to me by one of you guys. It'll be Omabrax0555. Big shout out to you, man. Thank you for the recommendation. I figured this would be fantastic to go check out, especially after seeing that secret level episode. You know, with obviously a little bit, not a lot on the youth of a Space Marine, but gave some kind of insight. A lot of you guys told me that was actually the protagonist, Titus, from the Space Marine games. I thought that was really interesting. I had no idea. But it's cool how you still kind of felt a connection to him, even though, like, me, for example, I didn't know who he was. I had no idea he was involved in any other sort of media, any other sort of works kind of thing, and I still kind of felt an attachment to that character, and they did that in the span of 15 minutes. I thought that was fantastic. But I figure, you know, I love Space Marines, I love the Chaos Marines, but I definitely love the Space Marines. I love the Black Templars, obviously, as you guys know. But I don't know a lot about their creation. I obviously know a little bit about what we've been told and I guess in the Bricky video kind of explained it. We haven't really seen a Luetin video explaining Space Marine creation yet. Maybe briefly he's touched on it a few times, but nothing we didn't like kind of already know, sort of thing. So hopefully with this video we'll get a little bit more context on that. We'll go a little bit more in depth into basically what makes a Space Marine, and I think that'll be really cool to see, especially with all the content we've seen about them, obviously. I'd like to know a little bit more how a Space Marine is grown. I know the original ones were vat grown, I want to say, like the original Primarchs were vat grown in a sense. But I'm told that other Space Marines, from depending on the chapter that you're from, you could be recruited as a human from just a world, and then they augment you afterwards. And I'm very curious to see how they do that, because obviously, you know, you have additional organs added to you, your size, your frame is just increased. I'm really curious to see what the explanation is for how they actually get all that done. Or maybe that was just a wrong assumption. Maybe that's only certain Space Marines do that, like recruit externally. I have no idea, but that's what we're here to learn, I guess. You know what I'm saying? So if you guys enjoyed the video, please leave a like, subscribe for more content from me, leave your recommendations down in the comments below. And yeah, big shout out to all of our Hastati and our Triarii, Paralyzed Tortoise. I appreciate you guys. You guys make this all possible. You guys inspire me to make more videos for you every single day, and I really can't thank you enough for it. So yeah guys, without any further delay, let's get right into this video. I'm excited here. As always, this is an informative video, so I got pen and paper. I will be writing stuff down.
As warriors, these men who give themselves to me, like clay I shall mold them, and in the furnace of war I shall forge them. They shall be of iron will and steely sinew. In great armor I shall clad them, and with the mightiest weapons they shall be armed. They will be untouched by plague or disease, no sickness shall blight them. They shall have such tactics, strategies, and machines that no foe will best them in battle. They are my bulwark against the terror. They are the defenders of humanity.
Wow.
They are my Space Marines, and they shall know no fear.
I think we've heard that one before, that quote. It's a good one.
Space Marines are humanity's most elite.
As always, I just want to say I love the illustrations shown in these Luetin videos. Big shout out to the Discord we just created. Go join that. We actually have a tab for Warhammer, our illustrations. If you guys have any, come share them with me. I'd love to see those. I love looking at the illustrations and the artwork that people do for Warhammer. It just looks fantastic to me.
Space Marines are humanity's most elite fighting force. They're the defenders of civilization, but their immense power is forged through a harsh selection process, extreme genetic and body modifications.
Yeah, we've heard a little bit about that.
Transformation kills many recruits, and those who do survive it are left arguably barely human. The conversion from weak mortal to demi-godlike superhuman is one gifted to only a tiny amount of humans in the 41st millennium. An Astartes, when his transformation is complete, will be stronger, tougher, mentally more powerful by factors than an ordinary human. And while a Space Marine's prime mission is to protect humanity, their physical disparity from ordinary common humans can actually leave many Astartes to look down on these lesser common humans.
Which we have seen. I'm going to pause there and just say, like, yeah, we have seen that a lot. A lot of our Astartes that we've seen, some are very like compassionate towards humanity in general, but we've also seen a lot that are just like completely like not ignorant, I guess, but they don't give a shit, you know what I'm saying? It's not their problem. Why should they care? They're out here living for thousands of years. The average human's going to live what in Warhammer maybe like 30, 40, you know. I'd have to assume, I have to assume that the age of like, you know, the average like living age in Warhammer is probably exceptionally low, especially if you're like a guardsman. I assume it would like depend on your planet though, because there's a lot of planets that like it's explained before. I think Luetin's actually explained before. There's a lot of planets out there that like you might not ever see war in any sense. You might not, very unlikely, but you might genuinely just be one of the lucky planets out on the fringes that nobody gives a shit about, and you're just allowed to like live your life, you know. But for the most part, if you're in the Imperium, you're likely to get drafted, and I imagine the living age is probably pretty low in general.
Astartes to look down on these lesser common humans, while others will feel a renewed sense of dedication to protect those who can barely protect themselves. It's important to remember that Space Marines are the defenders of humanity and not the rulers of it. Humans, for better or worse.
I just want to pause and say to that picture there, I'm pretty sure those are Tyranids. I think one of you guys said that the inspiration, I can't remember which way it was. Either the inspiration for Alien was the Tyranids, or the Tyranids like were the inspiration for Alien. I forget which it was, but they definitely do kind of look the same. Like from that picture, like that looks a lot like a xenomorph in a sense, you know what I'm saying? I think that's kind of cool, you know?
Have been the leaders of the Imperium of Man until recently with the return of Primarch Robert.
Somebody let me know about that though.
While the transformation of a human to Space Marine is complex, you'll often hear the terminology of a gene seed be used.
Yes.
Now, a gene seed is not literally a seed, but it is a specific organ that each Astartes carries with seed-like qualities. It's a term used to describe generally the genetic material of an Astartes. It's more accurately the cells and DNA required to engineer a human into an Astartes. The gene seed, more specifically though, refers to the Space Marines' progenoid glands, and the clue is in the name there when you think of progeny. These organs in a Space Marine respond to the other genetic implants they have and replicate DNA. Essentially, they are, in a manner of speaking, an asexual form of reproduction, which is why when a Space Marine is fatally wounded on a battlefield, an apothecary will fight to recover his gene seed. It's also why, yes, Space Marines do not require heterosexual reproduction. 5 years from implantation, a Space Marine's neck progeny glands can be harvested, but the chest glands won't be harvested up until 10 years. Space Marines essentially depend on themselves to produce new Marines for the chapter. Lastly, in this general sphere of discussion.
So, to my very basic understanding, obviously the video is going to explain it a lot more, I'm sure. My very basic understanding, they need that gene seed to create more, and to create more Space Marines, I should say. And essentially every Space Marine is birthed from that original Primarch's gene seed, which is where if they have a faulty gene seed, that's where you see like those congenital effects kind of thing carry on, to my understanding. I don't know a lot about it, but we have seen gene seeds be recovered in some of the animations that we've seen. So I think that's really interesting. At least we're getting a little bit more context on just why those are so important.
Cells to produce new Marines for the chapter. Lastly, in this general sphere of discussion, to answer a very commonly discussed topic, are Space Marines actually castrated? And then how do they excrete waste? Well, I can't actually recall anywhere in written law this being noted, so if anybody has a specific point of reference, please do link it. But my speculation, based on a few things that I've kind of looked at, is that pretty much the canon opinion is that Space Marines have no sexual drive. However, when it comes to excretion, it's true that their armor is also an environment suit that would cycle and process their own waste, much like a still suit in the Dune universe. Also, Space Marines do not live in their armor, although they may wear it for extended periods of time. It can be removed. It's entirely possible that their external genitals are removed and they have implants.
I like how there's a full-on discussion here about whether Space Marines got some junk or not down there. You know, I think that's awesome. Yeah, I guess they wouldn't really have a need for genitalia, although, man, I know you're fighting for the Emperor, but you got to fight for something else on occasion too. You know what I'm saying?
It's entirely possible that their external genitals are removed and they have implants to take care of waste, but I've got nothing to see that it points.
Oh, that reminds me. Sorry to pause again. That reminds me of that fucking Game of Thrones quote from fucking Bronn. He's talking to like Jaime on the castle walls, and he's just like, you know, you wouldn't find me fighting in an army without a cock. Like, you know, I just reminds me of that scene. Go watch Game of Thrones if you haven't seen it. That shit's awesome.
So it's an unknown, but it's not something that's critically really important in the scheme of things. It's equally possible that it's just seen as an organ as with everything else, and they just leave it all be.
I can't see them like going out of their way to clip, let's say, like an Astartes. I mean, maybe, but like, damn, you know, you got to think like a massive schlonger would also just be a sign of dominance, right? I'm sure the Emperor must know this, right? Like, no, I'm joking, I jest, but like, I don't know. It feels like one of those things. Like, I don't see why they would necessarily get rid of it, especially like, because he sees humanity as flawed, but like you don't see them just like vat growing humans, for example. You know what I'm saying? In general, so I can't see. I would imagine no sex drive, but I can't see why they wouldn't have genitalia. That's my opinion. Maybe I'm completely wrong on that.
Now, before we look further into
not to pause so long on the genitalia conversation, but
let's remind ourselves how they were created over history. Now, the first form of Space Marine was originally created by the Emperor during the unification wars of the late 30th millennium.
That's right.
Earth at this time was a barren wasteland of scavengers and barbaric warring tribes after civilization had imploded as a result of the Age of Strife.
Mm-hmm.
Earth, being cut off from its supply routes in the warp, cannibalized itself and fell into total anarchy. After the Emperor originally created techno-barbarians, a crude adapted form of super soldier, he would form them later into the Thunder Warriors.
Yes.
These warriors were brutal, powerful,
and that's who we saw in the Last Church. Go check that video out if you haven't seen it yet. Just a little plug there. But yeah, we saw them in the Last Church, and we kind of saw a little bit more about how they look and how they act, kind of thing. They were very brutish and not very much like the modern 40k Astartes that we see, or even 30k Astartes. They were a lot more brutish. You know what I'm saying? Really no mercy. Arguably better warriors than the Astartes, just because they had no mercy in that sense. But I guess the Emperor, the Emperor thought that they were not going to be, they didn't represent humanity, and to my knowledge, he got rid of them all.
Into the Thunder Warriors. These warriors were brutal, powerful, and most importantly, highly unstable.
Yes.
The Emperor knew that he wouldn't be able to work with these soldiers forged in the fires of anarchy beyond the unification of Earth's warring tribes. And so he secretly constructed his genetic facilities in a fortress deep below vast mountain ranges on Earth. Here, he would, with some few remaining...
That's on the Himalayas, if I recall.
Primarchs, using his own genetic material as a template. Then subsequently, the very first of the new breed of warriors, the Space Marines, or Astartes. But what are the Thunder Warriors? Imperial records state that the Thunder Warriors were nearly all wiped out during a particularly bloody battle at the end of the Unification Wars on Mount Ararat. Conveniently, the new Legiones Astartes were created readily to replace them. Now, records from this time are understandably fragmented, but described eyewitness accounts from the few Thunder Warriors to survive this battle, like Eric Taranis, stated that it was in fact the Emperor himself who massacred the Thunder Warriors.
Yeah.
Others have stated that it was also in collaboration with his custodian guard. In several instances that occurred since this time...
So that's interesting. The custodians at that time. When were the custodians made? Were they made like right away, I'm assuming? Or were they made during the time of the Astartes, kind of at the same period, you know, after the Thunder Warriors? I'm assuming just based on what Luetin said there, they must have already existed. which is interesting, I guess, because yeah, I guess they're not Astartes, are they? Yeah, thinking about custodian, like they're mostly human for the most part. They just have some of the Primarchs, not Primarchs, some of the Emperor himself's DNA, to my knowledge. To my knowledge, it's been a while. It's been a while. I need to remember that. I need to look through all my pages and recheck that.
Where Thunder Warriors have appeared and faced their Astartes brothers, the Thunder Warriors have nearly always managed to inflict casualties beyond expectation before they are finally felled. This gives some indication of how powerful they were as warriors, and why the Emperor felt they were perhaps too dangerous, given their power and psychological instability, to function as a disciplined fighting and defensive force for the new Imperium.
And I can see why, like, the instant, if he was to send them out on the crusade to try to reclaim planets, man, you wouldn't be reclaiming much. You know, you'd be reclaiming ash, I'm assuming, for the most part, because, like, these guys would roll in. There would be no diplomacy. It would just be, do you submit? No? Okay. And then your planet's going to fucking burn, I'm assuming. But to leave one of the Thunder Warriors in charge of anything militarily like that, like, the Emperor would always have to be present, always leading them, and that's just a risk, you know?
Regardless, this whole situation is a dark and little spoken of episode for the Emperor of Man. Vocalizing these events would no doubt have some Inquisition or Ecclesiarchy on their way to you very promptly.
Yeah.
With the Thunder Warriors killed in the Battle of Mount Ararat, the new Space Marines, the Legiones Astartes, would come to the fore. Unlike their Thunder Warrior forebears, they would undergo rigorous mental training as well as physical and genetic modifications. This would give them immense physical traits, as well as being near unbreakable with their mental conditioning. The new Marines were initially segregated into 20 legions. This separation was not for simple organizational purposes. Each legion was imbued with genetic traits from their Primarch, and as such, this impacted their character and behavior. To ensure unity, the Emperor designated them to stay together in their legions to reduce friction and ensure cohesion of the Astartes brothers. Through recruiting and conquest of human
And I guess
colonies,
little did he know at that time, but that would actually, I guess, eventually lead to the downfall, right? Having so many, I guess, in the same, like, having so many of these super soldiers together in the same place, in the same legion, swearing allegiance to their Primarch. Obviously to the Emperor too, but to their Primarch is the big one. You can kind of see how the Horus Heresy kind of got, like, underway so quickly, you know, and just how bloody it became. Like, you know, when you got 100,000 of these motherfuckers all swearing allegiance to their Primarch might be corrupted. You have no idea, right? But by time anyone can stop it, it's far too late. They've already done the damage they need to do, and the ball's already underway. You know what I mean? The ball's already been kicked. Yeah, it's just interesting. I like learning more about this. Obviously, we know a lot about this. Not a lot. We know some of this history already. We've seen some of it. But it's good to get a nice little recap here
of the Astartes brothers. Through recruiting and conquest of human colonies, as the Imperium expanded, so did the Astartes legions. What had begun as a handful of Marines swelled to tens of thousands during the Crusades. This would lead later to heavy damage caused during the heresy, after the Primarchs holding such immense power, being the sole commanders of each Space Marine legion.
Yeah.
After that period of chaotic incursion, Robert Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, would draft the Codex Astartes, and the remaining loyalist Primarchs would, after much consideration, agree at best that the Space Marine legions be split into chapters.
We heard about that.
This was to ensure no Space Marine legion could wield the sheer weight of power they had during the Crusades and subsequent heresy. This was known as the Second Founding. Each of these chapters would take a permanent homeworld or fortress monastery in the Imperium. The Codex Astartes states that each chapter would be 1,000 battle brothers in number and manage its own recruitment. A specific development in the creation of a Space Marine was discovered after the Horus Heresy: weaknesses in the gene seed. Now, as I previously explained, the gene seed is the core biological component in the creation of a Space Marine. During the Heresy, Space Marines were created on a massive scale, and as with any biological replication process, if you do this on a large scale, then mutations and errors can occur in this DNA replication. So
That
another
makes
result
sense.
of the implementation of the Codex Astartes by Guilliman was to slow the process of creating a Space Marine, to more closely monitor their genetic material and the material implanted within new recruits to ensure purity and expunge defects. Guilliman would also establish core genetic banks on Terra
Didn't
to
know about
ensure a
this.
stock of genetics existed. These pure sources would provide new material for the foundings of Astartes chapters and also prevent any further contamination. As previously described,
Recruitment.
each chapter is responsible for its own replenishment. It chooses where and how to locate potential Space Marine candidates. Many will recruit solely from their own homeworld, but others will reach out to hive worlds of the Imperium to locate powerful and resilient fighters who have shown promise and an unnatural ability in combat, even potentially recruiting from gang fighters in hive cities. Feral planets can also be good for selection, as the humans here are physically tough and have to deal with daily hardships more frequently than some other Imperial planets. Surprisingly, less recruits actually appear from the militaristic worlds like fortress planets, maybe because although knowing the lives of military discipline, they haven't endured the true horror and hardships that come from the rougher ends of Imperial life.
That's
Any
true.
candidate for a Space Marine will be usually young, between the ages of 10 and 15 years old. Obviously, they need to be strong, healthy,
Obviously,
and
all this is new information. This is detailed, in-depth information. I don't know any of this. This is interesting. This is what I'm here for. You know what I'm saying? This is the cool stuff. 10 to 15 years of age. Damn, that's very young, obviously, but you have to start the process young, and obviously with how long a Space Marine can live, you're talking thousands of years here potentially. Yeah, you got to start pretty young, and obviously the training has to start young. I'm curious to see how long their training lasts, though, because I assume it could be, my guess, potentially decades at a minimum. But maybe I'm wrong. Let's see here.
between the ages of 10 and 15 years old. Obviously, they need to be strong, healthy, and fiercely loyal to the Imperium.
Right.
Often on worlds where recruitment occurs, young male humans who show exceptional skill or strength are pushed hard to give them the best chance of potential recruitment. Candidates can occasionally be as old as 20, but the full effect of their biological conversions may not be as effective or complete.
I see. So it's the case of they're not only doing it because you have to start them young. It's the case of you have to do it while they're young so that the biological enhancement can take its full effect. That makes sense. Obviously, if your body is fully developed by the age of 2025, whatever, right? I can see how that could cause issues in lore. You know what I'm saying? Like that makes sense, because even IRL, like, if you're going to do a surgery, it's a lot easier to do it on a child, unfortunately, because their body is still developing, right? Their body will develop around that, versus your body is how it is. By the time you're 20, you're fully developed, right? In a sense.
Biological conversions may not be as effective or complete. Standard trials for Space Marine recruitment often involve combat, endurance, perhaps hunting of some extremely dangerous indigenous animal, and for the few who survive the tasks set by the Astartes who are there to supervise, the rewards are beyond estimation. It's difficult to describe just how revered Space Marines are to ordinary citizens of the Imperium. While they wouldn't be directly worshipped, they are certainly individuals with godlike reverence and awe.
Yes.
Many humans in the Imperium will go their entire lives without ever even seeing an Astartes, and they may only arrive on an Imperial planet once in a generation. On some worlds, they are even somewhat mythical. So for a family on an Imperial world to have their son chosen for Space Marine recruitment and candidacy would be an honor beyond imagination.
I can
But
imagine.
from some perspectives, bittersweet, in as all likelihood they may never see them again once they have been accepted.
That's
and
true.
in very high possibility will probably die in later processes. But it's nonetheless the
The chances that they actually, maybe they're chosen, sure, that's great, but the chances that they actually, complete the process into a Space Marine is unlikely. Like, I'm assuming when they're recruiting, for every one, there must be 10,000 or something to that degree. Every one, there must be 1,000. Maybe it's even rarer than that. Like, I don't really know. I'm just assuming on the scale of Warhammer, right? Like, when you think the Emperor needs to take 1,000 psychers a day or more by this time, just to live, I'd assume that the recruitment process for a space marine, like it, I'm just trying to think comparatively because we saw the Titan video that Luetin did, and for a princeps, for example, to become a princeps of a Titan, right? Like it's what, one out of like thousands, right? So, and it's even rare that they have the psyker ability to like be able to do that in general, right? Obviously with the space marine it's a little bit different, but yeah, I think that's interesting. I'm sure he might explain how many actually make it through process and how many are trained, but if he doesn't, somebody let me know.
Possibility will probably die in later processes, but it's nonetheless the highest honor to serve the Emperor and the Imperium in this way, and would no doubt lead to adulation, even possible special treatment for families after the fact. Ordinary citizens understand that to be accepted for the conversion to the Astartes, the Emperor's chosen warriors, is nothing short of becoming a demigod. Then again, you could just as easily have been recruited from a hive world full of daily extreme violence, and your gang was just forcibly made to participate in the trials, and you were simply the only one left alive at the end.
That makes sense.
That's your flip side of the coin.
That's fair.
You never seek acceptance to the Grey Knights. I'll cover that later. Despite all the
we've heard a little bit about them.
Candidacy, another element is spiritual purity. In the 41st millennium, imperial society is heavily religious, worshipping the god emperor, and most importantly, decrying the ruinous powers of chaos. Chaplains and the ecclesiarchy will continually monitor society around Astartes' recruitment sources to ensure that there are no signs of taint by the dark forces of chaos.
Aspirants.
With the easy part over, the selected candidates, now known as aspirants, will begin the ritual process of becoming a space marine. This may be a formal process of reciting scripture, or it could involve further trials. These could take place on the homeworld or result in immediate departure for the aspirant. Each chapter has their own private and guarded initiations. Some of these can be heavily traumatic and are usually significantly harder tests designed to break those who show even the smallest cracks of weakness. These trials for the young aspirants may even include ritual slaughter, scarification, even amputation and bloodletting. It's all designed to prove their commitment, loyalty, and unwavering faith in the Astartes chapter. Unsurprisingly, some aspirants do not pass this phase of testing physically or mentally. Aspirants will continue periods of testing and examination as well as actual live combat during their period as a recruit for the Space Marine chapter, and some of these trials may be cleverly disguised as coming-of-age rituals, other celebrations some more combat-based, although will be observed carefully by senior members of the chapter and chaplains who will be assessing key traits and behaviours, looking for candidates who fulfill their exacting requirements. Some of these aspirants from Feral worlds or even other worlds may not be truly aware of what Space Marines are, and this innocence may in some way protect them from making overthought errors that cost them later. Still, some chapters actually take little interest in these early stages and will only actually become involved later once aspirants have been further thinned down. The whole process is a physical and psychological minefield. Some challenges...
So it's interesting that it's like each different chapter has their own initiations. Somebody let me know like what some of their initiations would be for each of your, let's say your favorite Space Marine chapters. Somebody let me know, or each of you let me know, based on your favorite chapter, what their initiation would be like. Like what's the, how does it vary? You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say from like the Blood Angels to like, the Black Templars, like what would their initiation, like how differently would that look? You know what I'm saying? Because obviously he says they have different initiations. I believe that fully because, the scale of Warhammer, again, each world is different. Each chapter is different. Each legion was different back in the day, right? And their gene seed obviously, I'm sure, dictates to a large part what their initiation would look like. But I'm just wondering how much it varies. Somebody let me know.
Thinned down. The whole process is a physical and psychological minefield. Some challenges could be unachievable, while others, the simple act of survival is enough to merit approval to progress to the next stage. All the tests put to Space Marine aspirants are designed to test every element of their being to the limit and expose any weaknesses that are present, as well as learn about how they handle and make judgments on situations they are presented with. While the recruitment age for these aspirants is undoubtedly young, it's worth remembering that the nightmare environment of the 41st millennium is undoubtedly very harsh And so growing up and becoming an adult quickly
Yeah.
is something which many learn to do, and so their age shouldn't necessarily dictate your judgment of them based on our current period in time.
So, and again, that's a great way to sum it up. The best way I can think of that would be like medieval times, for example, right? In medieval times, man, you had 14 to 16-year-olds literally leading armies, generals of armies, straight up leading men into battle. It's crazy to think about, because the average age, like, bro, if you made it to 30, you were lucky. You know what I'm saying? Just based upon, sanitary conditions, war, illness, everything, right? If you made it to 30, it's like, you're a pretty decent age. Obviously, you had people that made it to 60, 70. It wasn't impossible to do that, but it was obviously very, very rare. And that's obviously why many societies revered their elders as such with so much knowledge. Because you got to think, if you made it to the age of 70, what have you seen in that time period? Like it's honestly kind of crazy to think about. So I don't think really age has much to do with like recruitment standards in this time period, again, because everything is so fucking brutal. If you make it to the age of 30, you're probably lucky, again. Do you know what I'm saying? So
their age shouldn't necessarily dictate your judgment of them based on our current period in time. Standard Astartes trials for these young recruits can include knowledge of self. Astartes look at recruits' mental strength equally to the physical. The horrors they will face in their lives as a space marine, despite later conditioning, require the strongest character in a recruit to be successful and worthy. They may use a chapter librarian to impose psychic horrors on a recruit to see if they survive the nightmares they're forced to witness.
That's fucked.
He may be forced to take drugs and face the worst parts of his own psyche. The stress and trauma of this trial can often physically affect their bodies as well, so in many ways this becomes the ultimate test for recruits. Completion of this trial will undoubtedly fundamentally alter the young recruit forever. Some chapters, like the Imperial Fists, consider this kind of mental testing especially important, but do so by exposing their recruits to literal physical pain, and we use devices like the subtly titled pain glove. These hook into the nervous system of the recruit and inflict horrific pain, but also maintain their consciousness well past what a normal individual could handle. The result will either be a mentally toughened but probably scarred individual, or a complete mental breakdown and death. An obvious and standard test for many recruits is exposure. Most worlds of the Imperium have unforgiving environments, and so sending out recruits into these wastes with little to survive with is an easy way to tell who is strong enough as a candidate. Space Marine apothecaries can rebuild damaged individuals, so the test is less of can you survive without consequences, and more simply, can you survive?
Yeah.
Many worlds are severely irradiated, frozen wastes, toxic wastelands, or ashen wastes, where planets have suffered total ecological collapse. Alternately, a planet could also be a literal jungle full of horrific creatures, small and large, ready to tear you to pieces or just melt your face off. As stated, the test is simple. Survive for a set period of time. It will also likely involve some object of crossing a distance from A to B, so as to avoid recruits just digging a hole somewhere and sitting in it until time has elapsed. Some of the tests could well be impossible to complete and are simply assessing who can survive longest or travel furthest before dying or near death. The Ultramarines and Space Wolf chapters are known to favour exposure testing.
To an extent that makes sense, yeah, but if it's an impossible task, outright impossible, it doesn't make sense to have all your candidates die trying. You know what I'm saying? That also doesn't really make much sense to me. That's a little bit silly. I feel like you definitely want at least a couple to survive. You don't want to make it impossible. You want to make it attainable for them. Because also you got to think too that builds motivation, right? Like obviously mental testing, physical testing, all these things I'm sure make a great Space Marine, sure. But what we have seen from a lot of the animations and whatnot, Hell's Reach, hope, Grimaldus had almost none until he just stopped caring, right? But if you can have hope, if you have faith that you will finish your task, that it's actually a finishable task, that you can see the end of it, and that you will be standing at the end, and to prove that to yourself as an individual, I think that does a lot for motivation. So I can see it, but I think definitely making the tests achievable. Not totally impossible, hard, very hard, but achievable is important. That's just my opinion on it.
The Ultramarines and Space Wolf chapters are known to favour exposure testing. A fairly self-explanatory trial, recruits are pitted against one another in one-on-one combat. When the last few remain, the assessing Astartes will usually halt the assessment. The type of duel could vary between armed or unarmed combat, consecutive combat, or recruits switching out on completing rounds. There is one constant though, and that is it's always a fight to the death. Again, apothecaries are able to heal most ordinary human wounds with ease, so these fights are often fairly no-holds-barred brutal affairs. Amputation and heavy trauma being the norm. Unsurprisingly, duels are the Blood Angels trial of choice, but others such as Dark Angels, Imperial Fists and Space Wolves also put this trial to their recruits.
Okay.
War is life in the Imperium, and although some worlds know this more than others, planets used for recruitment usually have some form of regular combat going on. This trial is less a trial and more a means of assessing potential candidates. Astartes may have observed headhunting particularly strong champions, or they may watch them from orbit, observing infighting between tribes on Imperial feral worlds. In this trial, recruits are tasked to head out into their homeworld and slay a beast for causing chaos or harm to their world. Many Imperial worlds host highly dangerous life forms or worse, orc infestations. The recruit must go out alone, or sometimes in small groups, and return with their captured hunt, often alive. With these group hunts though, the nasty twist is that there can only be one successful recruit. So they could turn on each other, break off alone to achieve or steal victory. I personally question the validity of this test. Fighting to the death to show strength over others seems plausible, but setting out in as a group, but then betraying other recruits seems to go kind of against the traits Astartes look for in recruits.
So like outright, that makes sense to me. Like outright combat, yeah, sure. If you're trying to prove who's the strongest, sure, that makes sense. I can understand that. But when you're promoting the backstabbing of your brothers, right? Seems kind of against the whole like point here, doesn't it? In a sense, yeah, he's kind of right about that. Like that definitely seems like a weird one to me. I feel like you would definitely want to inspire teamwork, if anything, right? To show that you can trust in one another, that you can have faith in one another, and the ones that let you down, then you obviously know you can't have faith in. But it's a brotherhood, right? In a sense. So it doesn't really make sense to me that you should be working to undermine your fellow aspirants, if that makes sense. That
recruit seems to go kind of against the traits Astartes look for in recruits. Anyway, on returning home, they'll be required to slay their successful hunt in a ritual in front of their community before being led successfully away in the throes of glory. Lastly, the quite vague challenge trial. And this is exactly what it is, some form of probably unsurmountable challenge. This could be to attempt to fight a full-blown space marine in combat. An impossible task, you might imagine, but usually remember this is the 41st millennium and bizarre occurrences are abound. While the thought of a child fighting a space marine seems insane, remember the task is usually to see how they approach it, not necessarily their success.
Right.
In some extremely rare situations, though, the aspirant may actually beat the space marine challenger.
I imagine that would be like the biggest upstart. Like you could imagine you'd be like, holy shit, this kid's fucking insane. Like, you know what I mean? Like we got a good one go here, boys, you know? Yeah, that would be crazy to see like some kid come in and just like wipe the floor with you, you know?
May actually beat the space marine challenger. As completely impossible as this may seem, that individual usually will hold some unusual or rare power and will go on to become a legendary hero of the chapter.
Yeah.
The aspirant will also usually be armed, while the space marine unarmed and without his power armor. Still, as with most of the former trials, the test here is really about if they can just survive at all, not so much best their opponent.
That was a really cool picture. I like how it panned up. It just shows like human form and space marines, you know.
Could be non-combat based and test a recruit's strength, speed, mental skill, or resistance to toxins. So they might, for example, be forced to drink nightmarish toxic chemicals, lift weights so heavy they break their bones apart, or evade some kind of horrific dangerous trap. Recruits deemed to have succeeded by whatever standards, however unlikely, will then be restored by chapter apothecaries. Ultramarines and again Imperial Fists favour these trials. Clearly, a great many recruits will not survive this stage of assessment, but even those who fail to be accepted but by some miracle survive will usually be heavily respected for having done so, not just by their families and friends, but by the assessing Astartes. Having done no wrong but maybe just not made the cut, these surviving but unsuccessful aspirants who were assessed on their home world may return to their former communities, a rare occurrence. Or they may continue on.
See, if you were to return to your community after all that, you wouldn't be the same person. There's no way you'd be the same person. After enduring all that, no. No, they just kind of made you you'd be respected, sure. But I imagine you would still be an outcast, a massive one at that. Like, there's no way that you could talk to somebody or explain the things that you've seen or done. Nobody will understand that. But an Astartes would, right? I think that's ultimately, at the end of the day, why they want you to join the Brotherhood. You know what I'm saying? Like, why they want you to, they do want you to join, but they want to make sure you're the right guy. If you're not the right guy, okay, go back, kind of thing. But at the end of the day, the people that do survive that are only going to trust other Astartes because they know what they've been through, if that makes sense. So it's kind of like an extra layer of loyalty in a sense to me, if you want to take it that way.
Return to their former communities, a rare occurrence. Or they may continue on to serve the chapter as a serf, a menial but loyal servant who takes personal care of, say, a marine's armour and weaponry. Those returned to their homes are extremely few, but surprisingly are not perceived as failures. It would be made clear to all that having just survived, they have shown sheer strength and integrity as an Imperial citizen. They would then likely go on to become a strong leader for that world as Imperial Guard, Planetary Defense Force, or some other leadership.
Neophytes.
Successful aspirants will now become neophytes. They will move on to the next stage, where they'll begin the early stages of conversion to a full Space Marine with the initial implantation of the gene seed and chemical adaptation of their genetically enhanced organs. This could mean immediate departure with a Space Marine brother to the next phase, or it may be that they are allowed to celebrate in their home community before departure. A very huge moral boost for the Imperial community there, and also to help reinforce Imperial values and loyalty. To be able to say your community gained a successful Astartes recruit is no small thing, and statues, paintings, songs and stories will be told for many years, if not generations to come. Neophytes will be expected to engage in training for combat as well as other mental training, as well as following chapter lore. If a neophyte should break chapter lore through ignorance or unthinkably by deliberately doing so, they will expect severe punishments. A neophyte breaking chapter lore will not simply be thrown out, they would likely be mind scrubbed, live out their lives as either, best case scenario, chapter serfs, being menial servants, or worse, forcible amputation and body conversion to life as cybernetic drones and slaves as servitors.
Yeah.
Successful neophytes immediately will begin.
So they really don't take any fucking. There's no what's the word? No rope to be given there. You know what I'm saying? It's like the noose is already tied. Kind of. If you throw your head in it, that's your piece. You know what I'm saying? They don't give you the rope to tie a noose with. They just already have the noose tied. And if you throw yourself in it, that's up to you. You know what I mean? Yeah, they don't play around with the rules here, I'm assuming, at this stage or after it. You know, I'm assuming once you're a full-blown Space Marine, even breaking chapter laws could result. Well, maybe not, though, because we see it happen a lot, actually, thinking about it. So I guess it really depends on your rank, doesn't it?
Conditioning to be implanted with their gene seeds and relevant genetic enhancements. Space Marines must be male because the gene seed is only compatible with male hormones and genetics. So no, you won't see female Space Marines. The neophytes also need to be tested for...
I was just going to say, give it 10 years. We'll see. No, I mean, if it's established lore, then I'd hope, under all circumstances, that established lore is kept with. I just know the age that we're in right now, you know what I'm saying? And You know, there's a lot of pandering to be done, and it's unnecessary pandering to me because even like nobody, if you enjoy Warhammer, bro, nobody I don't think is asking for more representation. You know what I'm saying? Because there's something in there for everybody already. It's like there's no sense to change pre-established lore. I don't like it when especially when other companies that have nothing to do with the original works come in, and then it's just like, oh yeah, we're gonna change the lore. Borderlands, I'm looking at you, like kind of thing. Like, you know what I mean? There's a lot like that, but yeah.
Compatibility. I'm always kind of surprised that this doesn't happen before the recruitment trials, but anyway, so they're tested for compatibility, otherwise as with organ transplants. Rejection would be fatal for the neophyte. Even with this testing, it can still happen later down the line. They will then further have their mental strength checked before implantation of the gene seed begins to ensure that they are in no way compromised by the forces of chaos.
That makes sense. Initiates.
If all these criteria are approved, the neophyte recruit will now become a Space Marine Scout, or in some cases a full Space Marine Initiate. They will live isolated in the Space Marine Chapter's Fortress Monastery on the homeworld, save for any approved missions. The individual will be tutored on battle methods, tactics, psycho-conditioning, values, and the history of his chapter. The reason these early Marines are titled Initiates is because it is still unknown as to whether they will even survive to the final end process of becoming a full battle brother. 19 organs grown from the chapter gene seed will be implanted to the neophyte Initiate. Some are transplants and others are grown in the trainee Marine's body. The gene seed will also adapt and change and grow the individual's body to become the giant size of a Space Marine, towering over ordinary mortal humans. Much of the body chemistry will be fundamentally reworked during this time, and the gene seed contains genetically engineered viral machines which rebuild the body to the template created by the Emperor. Any implant has a potential to fail, and this rejection will automatically end and probably kill the Initiate. As if the odds weren't stacked against them already, this further thins down the number who survive to the end of this arduous process.
And that would suck. I was going to say, it would suck to make it all that way and then just have your body just straight up reject the gene seed, and that's just it, you know, and you're dead after all that. Because you could be the best fucking candidate there is, but at the end of the day, maybe your body just straight up just doesn't accept the gene seed. That's so fucked, you know.
Thins down the number who
Be a
survive
shitty way
to
to
the
go
end
out.
of this arduous process. In brief, the 19 implanted or grown organs to become a full Space Marine are as follows. First, a secondary heart to increase blood supply and capacity.
Oh, that's cool. Okay, I see. So he's got it on the left side there. Wow, all the different phases and what's added in those phases. That's really cool. Just reading through these right now. So you get your secondary heart at 10 to 14 years of age. Damn. So they're already like biologically enhancing you like instantly, pretty much. Okay, wow.
Also pump steroids and extra adrenaline for battle situations. The osmodular or iron heart, this strengthens and grows the skeleton of a Space Marine so that his bones will contain a ceramic-based mineral which is added to an initiate's diet. After a few years, the Space Marine skeleton will be exponentially stronger than a normal human. The rib cage will have become fused to a solid bone plate, providing extra protection for internal organs. The biscopia is implanted within the chest cavity, and this increases skeletal muscular development, essentially muscle density. The hemastomen assists in carrying oxygen and nutrients more efficiently throughout the blood. It also assists in regulating the second and third implants. The Larraman's organ is also placed in the chest and manufactures synthetic Larraman cells. These serve like ordinary human blood platelets, but faster and more efficient. When a Space Marine is wounded, they form fully healed scar tissue in seconds, preventing hemorrhaging. This ability can make Space Marines appear invincible as they take wound after wound. Anything other than the most catastrophic of injuries is going to leave them still standing.
So that makes sense from what we've seen, how like a lot of Space Marines just get up and seem to walk shit off, you know, and even like with amputations and shit like that, it's because their fucking tissue just scars instantly to prevent hemorrhaging. Wow, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
After wound, anything other than the most catastrophic of injuries is going to leave them still standing. The catalepsion node is implanted in the back of the cerebrum. It allows Space Marines to avoid the need for sleep, entering them into a form of ongoing coma, allowing their brain the ability to systematically recharge by individual parts at a time. This enables them to stay on duty for hundreds of hours. The seventh implant is the preomnor. It functions as a decontamination chamber above the stomach and will analyze ingested materials, neutralizing any organic or inorganic toxins. It also enables Astartes to eat materials for sustenance that would kill ordinary humans.
Right.
The omophagia is implanted in the upper spinal cord. It absorbs information through ingested DNA and RNA related to memories. The purpose is to gain tactical or survival information by eating animals or life forms indigenous on a planet. In addition to a second heart, Space Marines also have multi-lungs as their ninth implant.
You guys kind of told me about that one a little bit before, I think, where it's like the case of they can eat their fallen enemies and they will actually gain memories from their fallen enemies, which like on the battlefield is fucking huge, you know what I'm saying? But apparently a lot of chapters do not like to do that because it's obviously a little bit barbaric, you know?
In addition to a second heart, Space Marines also have multi-lungs as their ninth implant. 3, in fact. This is to give them extra oxygen absorption in thin air environments. In a toxic environment, their ordinary lungs are shut off to allow the third lung to act as a filter for any necessary toxins. The 10th adaptation is the oculobe. It's a gene seed adaptation that enhances eyesight along the optic nerves. This gives increased accuracy of vision and increased low-light sight ability. Lyman's ear is not simply better for more accurate hearing. It enables Marines to resist ordinary human dizziness and for them to be able to filter out white noise and sonic attacks. The Sasan membrane allows a Space Marine to enter a state of suspended animation. This can enable mortally wounded Marines to survive until help or an apothecary's arrival. This hibernation period has been known to be able to last for anything as long as half a century. Melanochrome alters the pigments in the skin cells, allowing Astartes to shield himself from dangerous radiation and heat. Different levels of this in effect can cause physical differences between chapters, such as the very pale skin of the Blood Angels or the darker skin of the Salamanders. The elytic kidney filters blood to further remove toxins that have been ingested in combination with the 7th organ. It is best not to think of this, though, like an ordinary kidney, as this organ functions to assist in removing toxins before they have passed through any normal process of absorption. Otherwise, it wouldn't be very useful. It also helps to regulate the advanced circulatory system and other organs. The neuroglottis in the mouth allows a Marine to biochemically analyze things by taste or smell, or determine if something is poisonous or safe. Despite their advanced organs, this could still be very useful for a variety of purposes, and it can also enable them to track targets, much like a canine. The muconoid is implanted in the nervous system, and if activated through an external treatment, will cause the Astartes skin to secrete a waxy substance. This will cocoon them to protect them in situations of extended suspended animation, even the vacuum of space or other temperature extremes.
Jesus,
The Betches gland consists of 2 glands implanted in the mouth. These allow the Astartes to use their saliva as a corrosive acid when consciously activated.
Jesus.
This could enable them to corrode bars if they were held captive or remove doors from their hinges. It also can assist them in eating difficult to break down substances. Some Marine chapters have found that this organ no longer functions or has become less effective over time. The progenoid glands, or the gene seeds, are the critical organs of a Space Marine. They're implanted into the neck and chest cavity and serve as reproductive glands to allow their DNA to be collected upon death and safeguard the continuity of the chapter.
So that's at 16, 18 years old.
The chapter will cultivate germ cells from the progenoid glands to create the 19 organs of a Space Marine, or some of them, because some are grown within the Space Marine themselves. The final organ is the black carapace, otherwise called the interface. This material is implanted under the skin of the chest with the now shell-like ribcage. Fibered bundles then grow inward and interlink with the Space Marine's nervous system. Points for these bundles are pre-cut by apothecaries and form neural connection points. The function of these are to allow a Space Marine to interface with the heavy power armor, or as some would have you believe, the armor's machine spirit. These connections enables faster reaction and maneuverability. Without this, Space Marines would lumber around very much encumbered by the heavy armor they wear.
Right.
It's worth remembering that this whole process probably sounds heavily traumatic, but consider that it ideally happens when the young neophyte or initiates between the ages of about 10 to 12 years old and should be then completed by age 18. Many are
Right.
going to suffer critical or multiple organ failure during the process. The penalty, or arguably mercy for this, is usually euthanasia, although conversion to a servitor for the chapter is sometimes an option depending on chapters and their needs. Again, for those families who never
It would
see
suck
their
to be a
sons again,
servitor.
in some cases, it's probably
After all
for
that.
the best. All they need to know is he's serving the Imperium.
I guess so.
Now, more recently, since the involvement of Belisarius' call of the Mechanicum, Primaris Marines are a new breed of superhuman Astartes. Under instruction from Robert Gulliman, Primaris Astartes are only created from the gene seeds of loyalist Primarchs. They contain 3 additional organs, and their gene seed is considerably more genetically stable. Gulliman had instructed Call to develop these new organs with the goal of creating the Primaris. And their additional organs are the sinew coils. This enables the sinew of a Primaris Astartes to be durametallic, contracting with immense force, gifting them extreme strength and his body further resilience. This increased strength will literally enable them to crush the skulls of their enemies with...
So these are like a different class, essentially, of Space Marines. So this is not every Space Marine, or at least most of them. This is like the select few loyalist chapters, I guess, that are left. So I'm assuming like Ultramarines and that like probably have that.
This increased strength will literally enable them to crush the skulls of their enemies with bare hands. The
Wow.
magnifact, and this small lobe is inserted to the brain cortex. It secretes a hormone to increase the body's growth functions, with the goal of also intensifying further functions of the other implanted organs. Apparently, this organ is in fact half of the immortis gland, the god-maker gland of the Primarchs. For undisclosed reasons, Call was only able to discover the right half of this gland, not the full gland itself. The left half had been fully eradicated from Imperial records by either the Emperor himself or others unknown. And third, the Belisarian furnace. This organ lies dormant and connects to both a Marine's hearts. In times of immense physical stresses, it expels chemicals simulating combat stimulants, increasing the regrowth of tissue, bone, and muscle. This is a short-term use organ and requires time to recharge after using.
I see.
Now, if
Astartes.
this incredibly harrowing physical conversion is successful, the neophyte or initiate will have completed the
So I was very interested in seeing. Sorry to pause there. Very interesting to see all the different organs and shit they have. Obviously, you hear, oh yeah, they got like 20 different organs, whatever, right? But to actually see them all, what age they're introduced, and what each one actually does specifically, that was very, very interesting. I really like that.
harrowing physical conversion is successful, the neophyte or initiate will have completed the arguably most challenging part of his transformation. However, during these changes, they will still be undergoing some of the most challenging training and assessment regimes humanity had ever known. Psychological and physical conditioning, subconscious therapy, and endless live battle training sessions. Their senses and mental abilities far exceed ordinary humans by the end of this process.
Right.
Their mental toughness is beyond measure, and an Astartes will essentially ignore pain and environmental conditions.
Which we've
And
seen.
Astartes will assault enemies who, to simply look upon, would make an ordinary human suffer a complete mental break. Many, through endless conditioning, will develop photographic memories. Much of this round-the-clock therapy will also neutralize any latent character flaws and create stable, highly single-minded warriors. This endless mental and physical indoctrination will also teach and reinforce high respect for authority and to expertly carry out orders. With that said, it's important to remember that Space Marines are not mindless drones or clones. They are individuals, and while always following the rule of command, if a situation warrants it, they are entirely capable of disobeying orders if they believe it to be ultimately necessary. The consequences for this, though, could be, and usually are, potentially highly severe. At the end of this process, the few successful young children who are pitted against one another and survive the ordeals to reach this point will be welcomed as successful young initiates, becoming full Space Marine battle brothers, Imperial Astartes, the greatest warriors in the galaxy. Astartes' aging, though, does seem somewhat random, with some living even as long as 10,000 years. But given the fractured and strange nature of time in the 41st millennium, it can be really hard to put accurate expectancies on this, and many Marines who are not killed may reach at least half a century in age. It's no exaggeration to state that on successfully becoming an Astartes, these men would be far from what you would recognize as human.
Yeah.
Their extended lives and nearly unbreakable bodies are truly no prize. Their lives from this point on are spent in the sole act of defending humanity and the Imperium of Man. Accepting that their lives will be lost in battle at some point in the future, probably in horrific circumstances, they'll never see anyone they had ever known in their lives again. Families, friends will die far before they even begin to think of such things.
Yeah.
Space Marines are the protectors. Humanity in the 41st millennium stands on a precipice. We've known many horrors, disasters, and catastrophes, the ending of many worlds, but the next millennia will be the most critical. Threats surround humanity, some still difficult to gauge just how severe and if we can resist them. Our hope is in the Astartes, and the Imperium of Man, and the Emperor. With the Primarch Robert Guilliman returned, there is a glimmer of hope in the darkness.
Oh. Guessing the man never changes, so war never changes. Robert Guilliman, Ultramarines Primarch, Lord Commander of the Imperium of Man. Okay, yeah, so it is just music cutting out there. That's fair. Wow, guys. That was Space Marine Creation / Recruitment, your guide on becoming an Astartes, Warhammer 40k lore by Luetin09. Big shout out again to Omabrax 0555. Big shout out to you, man. That was a great video, and honestly a great recommendation after seeing Secret Level there, episode 5 of Secret Level. Go check that out if you haven't. Yeah, that was fantastic. I really enjoyed learning more about Space Marines, learning more about actually what makes a Space Marine, and learning a bit more about like their in-depth abilities, what they can do, what they can't do. And it gives a bit more credence to some of what we've seen as well. Obviously, like with them shrugging off blows and now knowing they have an organ specifically for the fact of like cauterization in a sense, or scarification in a sense. I think that's really interesting, and it like going forward, I think that'll add a lot of context to some of what we see. But no, I thought that was great. A big shout out to Omabrax 0555 and obviously Luetin for making this video. That was fantastic. Guys, if you enjoyed, please leave a like, subscribe for more content from me, leave your recommendations down in the comments below. And yeah, big shout out to all of our members, our Hastati and our Triarii, Paralyzed Tortoise. Big shout out to you, man. I appreciate you guys a lot. But yeah, guys, without any further delay, this has been Centurion, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace, guys.